Welcome to Living in the Path. You are about to study a module which is called Smashing the Delusions. And that module is going to present you a very powerful tool that is going to help you to develop a more peaceful mind. Delusions are arising in our mind constantly. Every second in our life, delusions arise. Delusions is what is causing our mind to be unpeaceful. It causes our mind to be stressed. It causes us to perceive many problems. It causes us to engage in conflicts. It causes us to engage in many unskillful actions which cause more problems. So if we could somehow lessen the delusions and even totally could get rid of the delusions, that would be so fantastic. Our mind would be so much more happy. The main cause of our suffering is our delusions. And if we look what kind of delusions that we have, what are the delusions, we can see three main delusions. One is the aversion. Aversion that if it grows bigger or if we nourish that with wrong mental engagement, that can lead to anger and even hatred. Aversion arises in the first instance as that what is protecting us. So once we see that it is actually not protecting us, but it is an unskillful means in order to deal with something that we don't like, we can quite easily say, oh, I don't like that aversion, and I see reasons why I want to try to eliminate that. A second root delusion that we have is attachment, and that is more difficult to recognize because attachment is the tool that brings us happiness. It brings us a happiness that is not really happiness in the sense that it is going to bring us peace and calmness and quiet. It is a happiness that is coming and going, that is actually, if you look into it, a little bit agitating the mind. And if it becomes really big, it becomes like an addiction. From an addiction, we can quite easily see that is not what we want. That is what we want to eliminate. But from the more subtle attachment, that is what brings us the pleasurable experiences in life, or at least we think that that is what is bringing the pleasurable experiences in life. It's more difficult to see that that is something that we need to eliminate. So for that, you need to really meditate on the nature of attachment and what it is really doing and what it is telling you that it is doing, because these two are not totally the same thing. And so attachment and aversion are both rooted in ignorance. Ignorance is of two types. Ignorance is that we don't know something, but ignorance is also that we have a distorted knowing. And the ignorance that is the root of all our problems, which is the cause of all our problems, is the distorted knowing. Not knowing how reality exists, but actually in a way that the way we perceive reality is totally opposite of how reality really exists. We perceive reality, our environment, everything, you know, our car, our kitchen, the people that are in our life, the food that we eat, everything we perceive in a much more permanent way than it actually exists. Things appear in a way as if they exist outside us, in and of themselves. They are just there, as if they are not produced, as if they were always there, as if they are independent of anything, and as if they have an entity which is there at the site of that object. So in dependence on that distorted knowing, that ignorance, everything that appears to us, our whole environment, everything that we see, that we hear, that we taste, but also ourselves, how we exist, that all appears in a more permanent, independent way, which does actually not exist in reality at all. So if we look a little bit closer how that ignorance comes about, or how it exists, then we can think about, for instance, a car. A car in itself is impermanent, has many, many parts, and arises in dependence on many causes and conditions. We call that the basis which is suitable to be called a car. So in dependence on that basis, an image, when we see that, an image arises in our mind of a permanent, unitary, independent car. That is the conception that arises in the mind. That conception we project onto that impermanent object, which is suitable to be called a car. And then what happens is that it's somehow that projection of our mind comes back to us, and it appears to us as if that is really there in the object. So we think that is a car. That is a unitary, permanent, independent car. That car is not at all there. That car does not at all exist outside in that object. What we call car, what we call the object that is suitable to be called car, and the label and the image that we have in our mind of car are two things that are totally different phenomena. In Buddhist philosophy, we say they are mutually exclusive. They arise together, and that is their relationship, but they are not mixed. But in our perception, they are totally mixed. They are the same thing. So there is this confusion of seeing the object of imputation and the imputed object as totally the same thing. And that makes that, on top of that, all other delusions arise. When we like something, we start grasping at a real thing, which is actually not there. Not in the way we think it is there. When we don't like it, we push something away. We believe it is really there and we don't want it. But in reality, what we think is there is actually not there. So, in order to cut that, we have to see the nature of reality. Buddha gave many, many, many teachings on how to look at ourselves, how to look at our delusions, and how to look at reality. All the teachings that Buddha gave were in order to eliminate our suffering. So they were in order to eliminate our delusions, which is the main cause of our suffering. In general, we can say Buddha gave two kinds of teachings. One kind of teachings is mainly focused on developing the good heart, which where we stop harming others and where we start benefiting others. This is when we engage in these kind of actions, we accumulate a lot of merit. So if we look into the kind of practices that the Buddha gave, we can think about abstaining from the 10 non-virtuous actions or engaging in the 10 virtuous actions. We can think about taking vows in order to counteract our attachment. For instance, the 8 Mahayana precepts or the vows of the monks and nuns. We can also think about generating bodhicitta, where we not only abstain from harming others, but where we actually have the determination to benefit all sentient beings. And on the basis of a bodhicitta motivation, we engage in the 6 perfections. All these practices are for the sake of lessening our delusions. Lessening in the sense that we create conditions around us, conditions in our own mind, so that delusions cannot arise anymore. This method can make us perfectly happy, almost perfectly happy, I have to say, because it cannot eliminate the root of all our afflictions. It cannot eliminate the distorted ignorance. If we really want to cut through the root of our delusions, then we need to develop our wisdom. We need to develop a wisdom that realizes emptiness. We need to develop a wisdom which realizes its object totally opposite as to how our ignorance realizes our object. In order for us to realize emptiness, Buddha gave many, many teachings, and they are called the perfection of wisdom teachings. There are many different ones. We have the 100,000 verses Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. We have the 20,000 and the 8,000 Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. We also have the Heart Sutra, and we have the Diamond Cutter Sutra or the Vajracutter Sutra. The Perfection of Wisdom Sutras in general teach how things do not exist. And that already indicates that the Buddha is showing us that we are adding something to existence which is not there. Things are empty of that what we add. We add the permanent, unitary, independent quality to existence which does not exist. Existence is empty of that. Existence is empty of inherent existence. Existence is empty, or the nature of reality is empty of true existence. So the Buddha has many ways of expressing this. But then what is interesting about the Vajracutter Sutra, which is that at the end of it he gives a little verse which starts with like a star, a defective view, a flame, and it shows us how all causative phenomena exist. And so after having explained how things do not exist, he actually gives a little bit of information how things do exist. And what he shows us is that things exist by way of being a dependent arising. Things are empty of inherent existence because they are dependent arisings. And in Buddhism there are 3 levels of dependent arisings. The most coarse level, we can see that ourselves. Things arise in dependence on causes and conditions. In the verse that you have at the beginning of your module, there are 4 or 5 examples of how things are impermanent. Things are like a bubble, for instance. And it is there mainly given with the meaning of that things do not last. Things can be stopped at any time. Everything that is around us, ourselves, our life, our body, all the people around us, all the environment around us, it can all be stopped at any time. So reflecting on that on a daily basis is a very good tool to stop your delusions, to stop your attachment, to stop your aversion. If we go to a more subtle level, then there is also dependent arising of depending on the parts. So anything that exists, all compounded phenomena that exist, and even all permanent phenomena that exist, depend upon their parts. They do not exist separate from their parts. They arise in dependence on their parts. So we can use that in order to generate a more understanding about a more subtle level of impermanence. So we can, for instance, think about our body and chop it into pieces and into parts and see that all these parts can be divided again into parts, and they can be divided again into parts until we end up at the most subtle particles which we cannot see with our bare eyes. But by chopping this on a rational level, we can get a good understanding of subtle impermanence, and that might help us to eventually realize subtle impermanence. The 3rd level of dependent arising is that things arise on the basis of independence on name and conception. Things are merely labeled by the mind. The meaning of that is that things do not exist over there. Things do not exist in and of themselves. Things do not exist from their own side. There is no existence from the own side of the object. If we go back to the example of the car, we analyzed the car and we saw that we project car onto that impermanent object. If car would really exist from the side of the object, and then we would have to find car somehow between the parts. So we could analyze the car and see if any of the parts is the car. But we will not be able to find car in the parts of the car. We can also not find car as something separate from the parts of the car. So car does not exist from the side of that object that we have imputed car. Car is coming from the side of the mind and is a name given to that collection of parts. So car is mainly is just imputed by the mind. Those who have realized emptiness, those who have realized that car doesn't really exist over there, that car is merely imputed by the mind, once you have really realized that and you come out of that meditation, then things appear in a totally different way. Things start to appear like a dream, like a hallucination, like an illusion, or like a mirage. And there are many, many examples like that in Buddhism that help us to understand how reality, how we are deceived by reality at the moment, and also how we have to see things in order to see things more in accord with reality. So if we start seeing things like a dream, that means that things are not really there. They are there, but not really. They are actually false. Our mind shows us something which is actually not existing in reality. So when we contemplate the meaning of these verses, things are like a hallucination, things are like an illusion, things are like a dream, it weakens our conception of inherent existence, our holding on to true existence again and again and again. And so when that conception is weakened, it was the root of all the other afflictions. All the other afflictions will not be able to arise so easily. They lose their strength. And so Lama Zopa finds this a very important verse. We recite it many times at the beginnings of the teachings. And when we recite it, he always asks us to stop and meditate on it. It is a fantastic tool that we can use in daily life. You know, you can use it from early in the morning to late at night, and you can apply it to everything that you see, hear, feel. Everything exists in the way of not existing inherently, of not existing truly. Everything that arises around us, inside us, depends on causes and conditions, is merely imputed in the mind, and therefore exists like a dream, like an illusion, like a bubble. And we can reflect on that again and again and again. So, I don't know, you can start in the morning, you can take one a day and try to practice like that, or you can use every day another one, or for a long time the same one. But I'm sure that when you start getting a feel for how reality really exists and you start applying this method, you will see in a couple of months, you look back and you can see that your mind has become much more peaceful. I hope you have fun with it as well.